Hello and welcome to a very special edition Establish the Million Thanksgiving. My name is Adam Levitan, joined by Michael Leone and Peter Jennings on today's show. Our goal is to talk about the 3-game Thursday Thanksgiving slate tournaments from a sophisticated, educated, well thought out perspective. However, the real goal here, relax, have some fun, celebrate Thanksgiving. We got the drinking game on, which, by the way, if you guys have not seen, if you have not gotten a drink, any mention of the following things here will be required for a drink. Please drink responsibly. Leone, how's it going today?
It's going well. I know this is your favorite holiday of the year, so I'm glad you get to celebrate with us.
Yes, by far the worst week of the year. Nevertheless, I'm here and in good spirits. Peter, how's it going today?
Yeah, I've always given you shit over the years about not liking this holiday. We have maybe the biggest football week ever. Huge college football slate Friday, Saturday as well. NFL Thursday. We have a Friday NFL game Sunday. So it's a lot of work, but hopefully we can make some money. Then it'll be a good week.
You know, God forbid we could have Friday. God forbid, but no. NFL has to take over every freaking day. We can't even get Friday. It's going to be Jets and Dolphins on Friday. We'll have the showdown content up for that as well. Anyways, it is 3:00 in the afternoon here on Mountain Time. I have an incredible amount of stuff to do, but as my dedication for the bit, I have a bottle of the finest whiskey here, Canadian Crown, and then I also have a couple beers here. Rolling Rock, shout out Pennsylvania. Leone, what are you drinking today?
I've got some generic red wine. That's where we're at right now.
Generic red wine, my God. Peter, I know, is in the midst of a drinking bet. Were you able to get out of the bet, a no drinking bet? Were you able to get out of the no drinking bet? What were the terms of the bet, and were you able to get out of it for this?
Yeah, so I basically 2 weeks ago told Shore and Bass if I had a drink it'd be $1,000, and I told them that this was a annual tradition and it's for the brand, and we got to make some money, so I gotta drink some booze, I guess. So I got out of it. I'll have to do something else in the future, but yeah, I haven't had a drink in a while, and I almost went nice red wine, but decided to go sour beers. So I got a variety of sour beers that I haven't tried before. Sippin' Tropical. It's all the Sippin' Odell brand, Colorado brand. So
perfect.
Anyone have a High Lie IPA in honor of Dink, who's just grinding the NBA streets here?
Yeah, I was just going to say Dink and Leone normally do this show together to the point where Leone's wife has to come in and give him waters and make sure that he is still alive by the end of the show. However, Dink, impossible for him to do the show this year. Just too much going on in the NBA streets. So we miss Dink. Shout out to him. Good luck out there in the NBA streets to anybody who is in it. Anyways, we're going to get to the slate here in a second. Before we do, two quick things. Both Establish the Run and the Solver are running Black Friday sales. For Establish the Run, head to the URL you see on the screen. Leone, if you can put us into the shell, they'll be able to see the actual address here, the actual web address here for the sale. But basically, if you've never tried ETR in season before, you can get a week of access for just $5. That'll give you access to all our projections, content, shows, Discord, etc. for the next 7 days. EstablishTheRun.com/Black Friday. All one word there. Also, for the Solver. Solver is our sister company, I would call it. Tools company. If you have not yet tried the NFL tools there and are interested, code NFL50 for 50% off the DFS optimizer or the single game simulator or single lineup simulator or the 20 lineup simulator. Just be sure to use the link I tweeted earlier about the Solver or the link on Establish the Run. And then also use your ETR email address when you sign up. That way, all our projections will auto sync into the Opto and sim in the Solver. So again, NFL 50 for 50% off the DFS optimizer, single lineup simulator, 20 lineup simulator for anyone new at the Solver. All right. 3-game slate always presents different challenges, I think. Oh, I said Solver. Hold on one second. I said.
Oh, yeah. We got to flash this up.
Yes. 1 second here. So everybody is aware of the rules of the game. I did say Solver there. I'm repeating it now, not so that we drink more. I'm repeating it now just so everyone knows. Going for a little whiskey here. My kids will be home from school in roughly 25 minutes. No one call child services. However, I did say solvers, so cheers to everyone else. All right.
Just keep saying it, bud. We're just keep saying it.
Oh, that tastes horrible. God, I hate alcohol so much. Okay. 3-game slate here, Leone. My take on the 3-game slate, the overall concept I always think of is that it is hard to find pivots. In other words, there's only a few guys on this slate that can actually get 30 DraftKings points. And so when you start fading guys like Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, etc., Amon-Ra St. Brown, it gets harder to find replacement value on those guys. So Leone, just generally high level, how do you think about 3-game slates from a tournament perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. I think you got to throw out the window a lot of things you're used to on a main slate in terms of, the correlations that you're going to use. You can do much heavier stacking. Like you can have Dak with his defense and like 3 or 4 Dallas guys. Like things like that can work in terms of onslaughts. The other thing is like not overthinking what needs to happen to win. There's only 3 games. There's a possibility that none of these games shoot out. In Showdown, we see this a lot too, where, people are like, zoning in on what the ceiling outcome is and like, oh, if Dak hits his ceiling, that means Howell has to do this. Like you kind of got to not think as narrow on these slates, which makes it difficult for sure because it's a little bit more vague. You can play a little bit less heuristically, but yeah, that's one of the key things for me is to try not to like overthink exactly the way things happen in order for me to win a tournament.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, we're only projecting 3 guys on this slate at the skill positions for 20 points or more. Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, and Christian McCaffrey. Dak is the only quarterback we're projecting above 20 points also. And so a lot of the lineups are going to be trying to jam 1, 2, even 3 of these guys in. How do you think about the short slates here, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, it's a better Thanksgiving slate than I think we've had in the past. We have a lot of expected scoring in these games. Generally, short week leads to lower scoring, but we have some really good matchups, and we actually have a decent amount of value. So it seems like a pretty good slate. There are some pivots. St. Brown's interesting. We'll talk a ton about Dak and the receivers. Tony Pollard finally scored a touchdown last week. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of build lineups. So I do think this is a better slate than we normally get. Obviously there's only a couple guys that have like huge ceilings, but yeah, I think it's a pretty good slate, and late swap's going to be super important, which I know we'll talk about.
Yeah. Late swap. We're going to be going game by game here today. Tomorrow on Establish the Show, I'll be with Wiggins and Silva. We'll go position by position. So we'll go game by game through this slate here. Just one more thing before we get into it, Leone. Late swap is going to be a huge factor, number 1, and how much salary you spend, I think, is a factor 2. Certainly can get unique by leaving salary on the table. So yeah, any late swap or salary thoughts before we get into it here, Leone?
Yeah, it would definitely loosen the constraints when you run the optimal. Like I said with the correlation stuff too, like you can play players against your defense. You can play multiple teammates without the QB. You can reduce the, minimum amount of salary that you spend. That's one way to get unique, especially in the large field stuff. As far as late swap, we're going game by game. We'll try and kind of talk through that. I know Dink absolutely loves this slate for the late swap. I've personally found it like easier in theory than in practice to know what to do in late swap on these slates, because it feels like, Jameson Williams catches a touchdown at 3K early and it feels like you need to have him. But then, if the Dallas stack goes nuke, that might not be the case. So it can be a little bit challenging, but I think in small field stuff in particular, you really want to pay attention to what it looks like the cash game lineups are and what your opponents have. That's where you can start to pull some more levers.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of cash game lineups, they're going to be very heavily weighted towards Dallas. And it's only Tuesday here around 5 p.m. Eastern. But my initial thought was just like, man, Dallas stuff is going to be very, very, very owned for people playing the projections. Let's start with everyone's favorite Thanksgiving team. Finally, at long last, they're good. They're big favorites. # our Lions will be in the first game. I don't have any injuries really on this team. There are a lot of injuries to watch for on this slate. Lion stuff is pretty clean here. I think one important thing that we saw this past week was the split between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs got a goal line carry of his own, as did Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs also saw 6 targets. Dave Montgomery only saw 2, and both of Dave Montgomery's targets were at the end. So it's a pretty even split here, but we do have Jahmyr Gibbs about 4 points ahead in projection due to his pass catching ability. Leone, if you want to sort to Detroit here on your screen, and then any Lions thoughts from you here as we start to go game by game.
Yeah, I mean, Gibbs, we finally seen the efficiency from him too. So that's part of the reason why he outprojects Montgomery and more work in the pass game. I know talking with Dank when we were setting this projection, we are like a little bit worried that the Lions go pretty run heavy. Their pass rate over expectation numbers are pretty consistently negative when they've had both Gibbs and Montgomery, and Green Bay kind of trends that way anyways in terms of what they allow and just not being that great of a team already. So we might have Detroit with less pass attempts than the market has.
I'm interested in Lions stacks. The guy that I think is the sneakiest one, Peter, is Laporta. They've dropped his price from 5,800 down to 5,200. I've played Goff doubles each of the past 2 weeks with Amon-Ra and Laporta. I believe you have the FanDuel pricing up there here, Leone, but on DraftKings, Laporta is only 5,200. Of course, Amon-Ra is going to be among the most owned players on the slate. We have around 33% right now, but I think adding Laporta might be able to give you a little bit of uniqueness there. Peter, any thoughts on Lions stacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Lions stuff makes sense. One comment in general that I've seen historically on these slates is people like to play the first game a lot. You know, they're ready to get into it. One other thing with late swap, people are drinking throughout the day. I think of all the slates, people make more mistakes on these Thanksgiving days. So with that in mind, my concern, I guess, would be a little bit of ownership on the Lions relative to kind of the projections, but I still like it. And Laporta is a really good pivot. There's a bunch of plays kind of on like these, you know, we have the Lions, the Niners, and the Cowboys is like the 3 high team totals. And there's pivots within those teams that I think make sense. Laporta being a really good one. Obviously, St. Brown will be really chalky, but then, yeah, I think a lot of people are going to play Gibbs. So I'll be curious to see the difference in ownership with Gibbs and Montgomery. Right now, we have about 20% difference. I think that probably makes sense. And then, yeah, Jameson Williams is really starting to come on. Had a touchdown last week. Obviously, really talented player, super fast. Hasn't played that many games with the suspension and injury, but certainly seems like a player who could continue to get more and more opportunity. 3 targets last week. I want to look at the route stuff, but you know, he doesn't need to play that much to get a good score given his like skill set and his price.
The route stuff's really good for him. Headed into the bye week, he hadn't hit 50% routes in a game. Week 10 out of the bye week, 55% route share. Last week up to 66% route share, even with DPJ active. So I'm interested to see if he gets steamed up in, you know, if it feels like the guy that we're all going to wish cast this week. If he is played at our current ownership, I think he's a really good play this week with the way the route share is trending and the big play upside.
Yeah. So I'll say 2 things. First, Donovan Peoples-Jones was active for the first time last game. He only ran 2 routes. You don't see guys get big bumps on short weeks. In other words, everybody's running around like a chicken with their head cut off, and they are not going to say, oh, DPJ, let's get you integrated here before Thursday's game, especially considering Jameson Williams played well. Let me read you this quote from Dan Campbell on Jameson Williams. He's part of the herd. He's been accepted, and the way he works and the way he goes and blocks, and he's starting to run some pretty good routes and making some catches. There's a lot of guys that are beginning to trust him, and that's been earned. So, you know, it's been a rough ride, I think, for Jameson Williams, but seems like things are trending up. A few weeks ago, either 2 or 3 weeks ago, he had a touchdown called back by penalty. Last week, he gets the touchdown also.
His 2 touchdowns turned back, I believe. So, called back. I mean,
So at 7%, that's going to be one of the best tournament plays on the slate. I think he'll get up probably closer to 15%, 10%, somewhere between 10 and 15 on DraftKings specifically before it's said and done there. But yeah, generally, Leone, any thoughts on Goff stacks here before we move on to the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, even though ownership's going to follow, I think it's hard to not get on, you know, the 3 main teams Peter said with the high team totals. We'll talk a little bit more about Packers in general, but just the scoring expectancy is pretty high, especially when we look at the full range of outcomes. We'll say that the Sims really do like David Montgomery and like the larger field tournament stuff early on as a pretty good leverage play relative to how much he's going to be owned. And I think that ownership is a little bit safer than, say, Jameson Williams' ownership. So Sims, we have to drink.
Sims and Steamed is not on this year, but Steamed was on last year. So cheers to everybody.
A throwback drink for Steamed.
All right. Packers is a much more difficult conversation because they have a ton of injuries here on this short week. First, we are projecting Aaron Jones out. We are projecting Emmanuel Wilson out, expecting the backfield to look like A.J. Dillon as the feature back. Now, he is on the injury report with a groin issue. Doesn't sound serious, expecting Dillon to be the feature back. I think he could get anywhere from 70 to 90% of the Packers running back touches. Leone, you can go ahead and flip the screen to Packers stuff now. So they also have Patrick Taylor. Now, Patrick Taylor was a guy that's been on the team for a while. The Patriots signed him to their practice squad. At halftime of the game on Sunday, Packers call Patrick Taylor's agent, tell him, we're signing you back to our active roster. We lost Aaron Jones. We lost Emmanuel Wilson. Our expectation is that it'll be Dillon again as the feature back, Patrick Taylor in some passing down situations, although Dillon has played in passing down situations the last 2 weeks, and then probably one of the practice squad guys, James Robinson, or something like that. Patrick Taylor and the rest of these guys are not in the player pool on DraftKings or FanDuel right now. We're not sure if they're going to add them. Dillon is an interesting conversation as a guy who has been inefficient, plotting, not known as a pass game guy, but his role could be awesome here, Leone. We do not have a great projection on him at 12.5 points on DraftKings. Why don't you talk through how we're projecting Packers running back?
Yeah, we don't have him being like a crazy share of the work. We have him and Taylor like somewhat close in terms of projected target share. We do have Dillon with a crazy workload on the ground, but we just had that as not super valuable with the team total not as high for Green Bay. Detroit having a pretty good run defense, and Dillon hasn't been that efficient. My guess is he could end up a guy that's not like crazy owned, but maybe owned too much for his upside if people are just circulating base projections from around the industry, because it'd be hard for him to not project as a good value because of the overall workload. So early on, I'm a little bit bearish on Dillon in tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. We'll talk more about Dillon in base on Established Show tomorrow. But yeah, it's 17%. AJ Dillon, even on 3-game slate, scares me a little bit. The one that scares me a lot, Peter, is Christian Watson coming in at 20+%. He's very cheap at 4,300. Roll remains good. Scored a touchdown last week, but was out targeted by, everyone. Wicks, Musgrave. The reason he's projecting well in this game, or at least projecting reasonably, is because of all the injuries that they have. We are projecting Luke Musgrave out. We are projecting Dontavian Wicks out. They are a mess right now. Still, 4,300. Christian Watson, if he gets steamed up, strikes me as a pretty good fade. Peter, any thoughts on Packers pass catchers here?
Yeah, Christian Watson had another play where he made a nice catch that was almost a touchdown. I think he would have been out at the one, only 1 foot in bounds, but they targeted him in the red zone. I do think the best play in this game is the other receiver at his price, who I actually think we are too low on in terms of the projection. That's Jaden Reed. Super high throughout the best ball season on Jaden Reed. We always had him ranked here at ETR higher than kind of the market. Have a ton of him. And the thing that's exciting to me, and I think that is relevant for this slate and relevant in this game, he had a bunch of rush attempts. I think he had 3 rush attempts last week. They're going to use him with the change of direction stuff, and especially given the lack of speed and just kind of what they have with Dillon at running back, I would expect him to get 3, 4, 5 rush attempts potentially in this game. Definitely involved in the short passing game, and I think he's one of the better plays on the slate. So that's someone that I really like in general. We need him for our best ball teams, and yeah, he's explosive. He was awesome at Michigan State. I played him a ton in college football DFS too. He's a baller, and he's coming on strong. So yeah, I think I prefer Reed to Watson straight up, and especially if we have this ownership, like I'll probably be in on Jaden Reed.
Yes, agreed. I like that, and I would say the Wicks injury is big for Reed. Reed and Wicks were kind of sharing time. With Wicks out, it went to full Reed, and I think Peter's point, given their given their running back situation, Reed getting carries, I think is super interesting. Leone, I don't know, man. Jordan Love stacks seem way too thin for me in this spot. We have that around 11%. However, I am not the king GPP bro. Would you consider Jordan Love stacks on this slate?
I would. To some extent, I think they're more interesting than, like, let's say Geno stacks as contrarian stacks, where at least, like, it seems like our sims are picking up on a larger range of outcomes on on Love, where, like, he's not that good. He completes a low percentage of passes, but his yards per completion is so high that the tail outcomes get pretty good if you can hit some of those longer plays throughout the game. I'm a little bit more into Christian Watson than I think you guys are. I mean, we'll see where the final ownership comes in, because that's a big deal. But I do think some of these, like, big play guys can just run bad for a stretch of games, and then all of a sudden we see him hit like 2 long balls in the same game. Like, I don't think the ceiling's evaporated that we saw last year. So, but to Peter's point, in yards per route run, Jaden Reed's at 1.82, Watson's at 1.21, Dobbs is at 1.27. So he's clearly been the most efficient receiver. Wicks has actually been pretty good in, like, a very limited role, but we're expecting him out too. So, yeah, I guess the last thing to talk about with Green Bay is if in the large field stuff, it's worth playing any of the, like, Samari Toure types just on the back end. And I think probably not, but they are, pretty thin. We didn't really talk about tight end either with Musgrave. Yeah. We're expecting that to be cracked.
I was going to say that I think Tucker Kraft, 6'5", 254, ran a 4.69, which is not bad for his size, 34-inch vertical. He is an athletic guy who is going to get a big chance now, and he is stone minimum 2,500. Again, we expect Luke Musgrave out for this game. Obviously, we're going to have to come up on Tucker Kraft ownership here, but yeah, I think that's an interesting one as a touchdown bet as part of Love stacks or part of game stacks here in this game.
Real quick on the Jordan Love stacks, here's where I think it could make sense. I do agree it's thin relative to some of the other quarterbacks, but this is the type of lineup that I think I could see working.
Oh, man.
You go Love, Watson, Reed, and then you stack the stud running backs. You go McCaffrey, Pollard, Gibbs, because of the savings. And basically what you're hoping is that you're getting rushing touchdowns from the 49ers, the Lions, and Dallas. And your team doesn't even project that bad because Love's cheap. Obviously, the DAC stacks are going to project better, but you do something along those lines, and that's a way the games could definitely play out. Is, Pollard gets 2 touchdowns, McCaffrey gets a lot of the work and scores 2 touchdowns. Maybe Gibbs and Montgomery, and Goff doesn't throw for a lot of touchdowns. Like, that path makes a little bit of sense to me. I definitely prefer that to the Seahawks stuff. I know we're going to talk about Geno, but I'm going to be too worried to play Geno in the passing game, I think, after what we saw last week.
Yeah, and to Peter's point, from a construction standpoint, if you fade the high-priced wide receiver, what you're saying is that CeeDee, Amon-Ra, Ayuk, DK Metcalf get outscored by McCaffrey, Gibbs, Pollard types, right? And, like, that's, like Peter said, I think that's certainly
play Debo Samuel on that lineup. Like, Debo could score a rushing touchdown for San Francisco too. You play Debo and McCaffrey together, and, like, that's how they score their points. Just be thoughtful when you're making these teams, like Leone said up front. It's like, how could these games play out, and does your roster construction make sense for, like, a way that the games could play out where you can win?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Packers are just putting everyone on the injury report. Jaden Reed was just released today on the injury report as a limited participant, apparently. So, I mean, but they have like 100 guys on there. Like, Dylan's on there. I'm not going to be worried about it until we get the final report tomorrow. All right. Let's move to the second game. The second game is a classic Thanksgiving Day battle that we always get, seemingly, between the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington football team, a.k.a. the Commanders. Let's go ahead and start on the Dallas side here, Leone. This is going to be, I think, the most owned, the most popular side. And you get that because Washington's defense is egregious. I mean, they just let Tommy DeVito absolutely shred them. They traded away Chase Young and Montez Sweat. I mean, their secondary has been awful. The kid they took in the first round, they can't even put on the field as their cornerback. He's so small. And then you also get Dallas coming in here white hot. So from an ownership perspective, it is going to be a freight train, I think, for everyone. Sim bros, Opto bros, hand builder bros, everyone is going to be on Dallas. When you see something like this, Leone on a 3-game slate where everyone is piling into one side, I don't know that we can fade this whole team. So how do you think about Dallas stuff here?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. You kind of got to get a handle on how owned is it. Like, obviously, it's going to be very owned. We have Dak at 32% large field, even though there's 6 quarterbacks on the slate, 37% small field. Like, that's pretty crazy when there's 6 quarterbacks. But does it get to like 50 plus really in small field? Like, then you start to get pretty worried. At current ownership, we just have him projecting so much better than the other quarterbacks with such a positive range of outcomes that I think it's still probably pretty good. We have CeeDee Lamb. And the other thing, too, to watch is like CeeDee Lamb's ownership versus Amon-Ra St. Brown. We have them similarly owned right now, but with a much better projection on CeeDee. So that makes CeeDee one of the better plays actually relative to ownership, even though he's chalky. So I have a feeling we're going to come up on the Dallas ownership. But as it stands now, I actually think, if it were to hold, the Dallas stacks would be pretty good to play. Just their pass rate over expectation out of the bye week. I've been hitting it on every week, but they've been plus 15%, +9, +9.5, +4% last week, and a pretty easy win against Carolina. Like, they've clearly had an identity shift coming out of the bye week. Dallas is extremely efficient. Dak's awesome. They're facing a pass defense that you mentioned that gives up big plays. I know in props, we took the over on Dak's attempts and yardage already. So I think the Dallas ownership would have to get really, really high for me to say, like, you can't play them. I think you can mix that chalk in and then maybe, figure out some other ways to leverage off it.
So to me, this has been like, and get ready to drink. To me, this has been like one of the best use cases of the Sims is like, yeah, Dak is going to be the most owned. Dallas stuff is going to be the most owned, but it still might not be owned enough, right? And I couldn't really get my head around that. There was a way to get your head around that by putting lineups through the sim and see if it's actually too owned. In terms of too owned, Peter, our old friend Tony Pollard showed some life. I mean, that was a awesome touchdown run. However, his usage was in line with kind of what I expected. I mean, he continued to be somewhat inefficient as a runner, even against Carolina. They did get him 4 catches in that game. They weren't that high quality of catches. It's another incredible matchup here for Tony Pollard. Rico Dowdle is on the injury report again with that ankle, but he was able to play through it last week. So yeah, how do you think about Pollard here? I mean, 43% Pollard strikes me as a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you can go about it. I mean, you can go, hey, Dallas is in the best spot ever. Short slate. I'm just going to onslaught it. I think that's going to be somewhat popular. I think there's obviously most people are going to have a lot of Dallas pieces. So you play Dak, you play Pollard, you play Lamb, you play another pass catcher, and you just go with it. Maybe even play Dallas D and just say, hey, it's just going to be annihilation. There's not going to be that many points everywhere else. The other way to look at it would be say, okay, I'm going to load up on the Dallas passing game. Pollard doesn't score a touchdown again. We've seen those games. We see what those look like. You can play Dak and 3 pass catchers. Those are going to do pretty well based on what I've seen in the Sims so far. And you can load up, maybe a receiver on the Washington side. The other option, which this is the one I'm trying to figure out, like how much leverage do you get playing like Pollard, Cowboys D, maybe one other piece and just hope, hey, Dallas scores 2 defensive touchdowns. Pollard's the one getting rushing touchdowns and Dallas doesn't throw a ton. And like somehow these pieces don't get there in like the best matchup. Yeah. I don't know how to think about that. It doesn't seem like it's what's going to happen, but that's again, the GPP bro stuff. And from what I've done limited work, it doesn't seem like that's great, but curious your perspective, Leone.
No, I think that makes sense. And I guess 2 things. One, right now we have Pollard, like relative to ownership and odds of being in the optimal lineup, as over-owned, and CeeDee Lamb as under-owned. But with that said, the one thing I found like building lineups through Solver and whatnot is some of the guys that have, let's say, like negative leverage score, if you say like odds of being in the optimal relative to ownership is like you're less likely to be in the optimal than the ownership would indicate. In the right lineups, those guys still can make a ton of sense. Like it's not a blanket thing where, okay, this guy's negative leverage, don't play him. And the way you're talking about playing Pollard is extremely thoughtful. Like play him with the Dallas defense. Howell could take 1 million sacks in this game, even though his sack rate's been a bit better recently. Fade the Dallas passing game where Dak's going to be extremely popular. and then just get on one of the other stacks. Like you don't even have to get, we like the Love stack. I think it's contrarian, but you could also just get on the Detroit stack or the Geno, or not the Geno, the San Francisco stack with it too.
Yeah. The onslaught here, I think, is going to be popular, but I've been doing a ton of these onslaughts in small field FanDuel where, like Peter said, I would play Dak, CD, Ferguson, Pollard, and you can only play 4 on FanDuel, but if I could play 5, on DraftKings and Cowboys, and like trying to just they're going to score 30, 40 points in this game. I think that's really likely. And I try to capture like all of that in a lineup at the same time. I definitely think that's viable. The problem is, Leone, I'm not sure out to what field size that's viable. Like I'm talking about playing that in 80-person fields. How in a 3-game slate, how small does the field need to be for you to go full onslaught on a team?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. Like I was messing around simming the Game Changer, which is 212 entries on DraftKings, and a couple of the best lineups are like full on onslaughts in that field size. I think it's tough. Like as Peter said, though, this is a better slate than we've had in the past, which makes it a little bit more challenging because if you're, fading like 5 crappy teams, that's one thing, but you're fading Detroit with a 28 team total. You're fading, San Francisco with McCaffrey as one of the most consistent fantasy players out there and Purdy as the most efficient quarterback. So I probably like it a little bit better or a little bit worse than it's been simmed from what I've seen. So I'd say like maybe more like 100-person contests or less. And when you start to get outside of that, I'd probably try and be a bit more picky with how you play it.
Yeah. Last thing for me is the role change for Michael Gallup. I mean, they're not even playing this guy anymore. They're giving like Jalen Tolbert routes ahead of Michael Gallup. Meanwhile, Brandon Cooks, I think, remains a featured part of the offense there. All right.
Yeah. That's what I was going to bring up. Or go ahead, Leone.
Yeah, the Tolbert Gallup stuff is like interesting where Tolbert's had a double-digit target share 3 weeks in a row. Gallup's routes are dropping. I'm curious to see where the ownership falls on those 2 players. I have a feeling people are going to play Gallup because of name recognition, but the projections like across the industry actually slightly tilt the way of Tolbert, as you can kind of see ours do as well with the same raw projection and Tolbert at a lower salary.
All right.
Real quick on the Cook stuff. I mean, I agree. Tolbert, Gallup are interesting. It's a small slate, so one of those could end up. I would definitely lean Tolbert given the reduction in Gallup's role, but Cooks is like the epitome of like the pivot that I think makes a ton of sense. You play a ton of Dak, and you just go heavy Brandon Cooks, who just came off a huge game 2 weeks ago. Indoors, historically, he has huge splits indoors, and obviously at any point in time could bust a long touchdown. I think he's finally getting his rhythm with his team, and yeah, he's not going to project super well, just given how many options they have with Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb being a target monster. But he doesn't need that many catches to have a huge game and be like the person you have to have given his price. So Cooks is one of my favorite plays on the slate.
I can't believe we don't have this on the drinking card. But Peter, what about the Turpin Dallas defense double dip?
The double dip. Gosh, the double dip.
I don't think there's enough there for this slate. If it was a shittier slate, maybe. But.
Yeah. I'm not going to play it, but I will say that Turpin was the most unbelievable returner I've ever seen in the XFL this past year, and he's continued to do that in the NFL. I mean, he's undoubtedly one of the best returners in the whole game. All right, let's go to the Washington side here, Leone. So what you get with Washington is known game plan. Sam Howell is going to drop back at an absurd rate in this game. That's just what he does every week. You also get a really wide target share. They're going to throw to 6, 7, 8 guys in this game. Will Sam Howell. We also know Sam Howell is going to take a ton of sacks. From an injury perspective right now, we are projecting Antonio Gibson out for now, but he was listed, I think, limited with this toe issue. He's just been having a toe issue for so long. That one scares me a lot. Brian Robinson has caught 13 balls over the last 2 weeks, which I was not sure was even in him. So difficult spot for Sam Howell here, Leone. You're asking him to drop back 40 plus times against arguably the best pass rusher, one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. It is hard to see him having success in this setup, but that is why we have 10% large field, 7% small field projected. Leone, what are your thoughts on Commander stuff in tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, I think Howell might be I don't know. We don't have his ownership that high. His over-under in the prop market right now is 39.5 for pass attempts. So, like, that's a huge number for a quarterback like Sam Howell. So the market's definitely expecting him to chuck. How efficient he's actually going to be on those attempts is a different story. I think the Howell stuff might be, I don't know if I'd say overplayed, like, because he's not that owned, but when I was looking at stuff initially, I wasn't like that into it. We do run into this situation. I played it last week against the Giants where I thought their scoring expectation was a lot higher and they were disappointing. But it's always difficult to tell exactly who it's going to go to. And we'll see where the Curtis Samuel ownership comes in at. We have it kind of high right now because he's like the quote unquote safest of like the really cheap guys. I'm wondering if it comes in meaningfully lower if people like get on Jameson Williams and some of the Dallas guys. So I want to track that. But right now I'm not like super interested in Samuel at 25% ownership. And then just circling back to the Brian Robinson thing, he played 78% of the team snaps last week with Gibson out. He had previously been, I think week 1, he was at 61%. That was his previous high, but he's mostly been around like 50-50 in terms of snaps played. So that was a really big bump for him last week.
The problem is that if Antonio Gibson is active for this game and they get behind, which I expect them to do, you probably end up seeing a lot of Antonio Gibson. So I think like not the cleanest spot at all for Brian Robinson here. We have McLaurin at 30% ownership, Peter. But gosh, and like close your eyes, bet on talent. Terry McLaurin 5,400. I get it, but the matchup and 30% and how much they're spreading around, that seems like bad chalk to me. Peter, any thoughts overall on Commander stuff?
Yeah, the first thing that stands out is the Curtis Samuel. I mean, he got ejected last game. I would expect Jameson Williams to be, maybe not more owned, but like very similar. Like to me, it's like a more comfortable click than Curtis Samuel in some regards. So that's the ownership that stands out to me. I would expect that to trend down. I do think Terry McLaurin's really interesting. And then how is Chris Rodriguez 4,600? Because that should be like a 3K play that like if Gibson's rolled out, and shout out to Dink and Leone, you guys were talking about Chris Rodriguez on Established a Million. That was hilarious. So I don't know why he's 40. Why is he 40? Why is he so expensive?
Yeah, his salary went up on FanDuel too. I mean, I guess 3-game slate, the salary goes up. It's always a little bit easier to get creative on FanDuel with a wider salary spread, but that's annoying. I do think like if Gibson did end up playing, I think people would be afraid to play him off injury and just because he wasn't in projections most of the week. And as you said, Adam, the game script could really go his way where he'd be pretty appealing to me if he ends up in.
Howell is our 4th projected quarterback, but he's in the same ownership bucket as Goff, Howell, Love, Geno. In other words, we have Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott separating in ownership. Howell and the rest of these guys behind. We have pretty similar base projections on Howell, Love, Goff, Geno, all within 1.7 points of each other. Leone, what do you think about Howell stacks here? Do you like Howell stacks at all?
I mean, I don't right now. Like, I'd rather play the cheaper Love stacks and do kind of what Peter said, where you can like get into extremely high projected running backs at expensive salaries, or I'd rather play Goff at not that much more ownership and a much better team total. And we'll see if our ownership's off. We're going to like go through a thorough update tomorrow. That might change, but I do think that you can see that, we do have Goff and Howell somewhat close, but we prefer the range of outcomes on the team that's projected to score a lot more than Washington.
All right.
Do you guys remember that run that Howell had for the touchdown? That was outrageous.
He can run.
That was the play that Curtis Samuel got ejected. I mean, he was in, and then he didn't know if he was in, then he ran again, and that was one of the more impressive runs I've seen all season. So I don't love it either. I kind of agree with you, Leone. My lean is not to go there, but the rushing creates kind of a different level of ceiling. And if you just look at his game log, he's had some big games. So I'm with you. I'm not going to throw him out. I'm still trying to get a gauge on ownership too, obviously, but I do think the rushing element plus them being down in a big way in some scenarios where he can just get a ton of garbage time points, makes him interesting.
Yeah, the thing I'd say on him, again, when you have a 39.5 attempts line, like if he's attempting 40 plus passes, if he can actually be somewhat decent, like there's some correlation there where if he's like not good, he's going to throw more because there's more incomplete passes. But there's going to be, especially on DraftKings and full PPR, it's going to be tough to pick the right pass catchers. But if you do, the upside is going to be there because there's going to be a lot of catch volume potentially. Like his completions line is around 25, which is kind of crazy against Dallas, but we have him like not too far off that. So that's probably the most appealing part of Howell is like, if you can run pure on efficiency, there's not really going to be another quarterback that's going to drop back as much as him.
It's just hard for me to see efficiency in this spot for him against Dallas, but obviously crazier things have happened. George in Rhode Island says, Peter, any insight on betting lines for these games? Peter, have you made any bets yet on these games? Where's the market been going?
No bets for me yet. Generally bet day before and day of for longevity, but this is a crazy week of betting. College football is something I'm betting a lot more of, and it's going to be wild with the Friday, Saturday slate. But yeah, Sunday should be interesting. Thursday will be interesting. No insights on the betting side. Did get a lucky Packers win, which I touted on the last show. So happy that they won. And that was lucky. Finally ran pure in the regard that we got a fumble in the red zone from the Chargers late in the game.
Any betting stories opinion is 2 sips for anyone actually playing the game out there. So cheers. All right. Let's go to the nightcap, which will be an NFC West showdown between the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. We can go ahead and start on the San Francisco side here. What you saw last week when everyone was healthy is, I think, the way that San Francisco can win the Super Bowl. Brock Purdy only threw really to 4 guys. Juwan Jennings got 1 target, but every other target went to Ayuk, Kittle, Debo, CMC. I mean, that is an outrageous quartet to be throwing to. They're also one of the most talented teams in the NFL. On the defensive side of the ball, Christian McCaffrey's price has come down. He was 9,300 on the main slate. He's now 8,700. I suspect he's going to be the most owned player on this entire slate. Let's start there, Leone. I would never call Christian McCaffrey bad chalk. In small field, though, he could get up to 60, 70%. I don't think it's crazy, depending on the buy-in and how big the field is. So how are you thinking about handling McCaffrey on this slate, Leone?
Yeah, that's where, like, I think you got to get a gauge of how many people go studs and duds. And if McCaffrey, you think he does get to 70%, does that mean CeeDee Lamb is like held in check somewhat? And that's where you could maybe play leverage off of CMC, but, you know, not someone, as you said, like I'm looking to actively fade. His touchdown equity so high. His pass game role is good. San Francisco in general, I still think there's a ceiling that Purdy could hit that he hasn't yet. You know, he hasn't broken, I think, like into the 30s in DraftKings points. He's been close the last 2 weeks. He's averaged 25.5 pass attempts per game the last 2 weeks, like extremely low. And he's thrown for over 600 yards and he's thrown for 6 touchdowns. It's just absolutely wild, the efficiency in this offense. They just really haven't been pushed. You know, the one game they were pushed was the Cincinnati game, but he didn't play that well. And he threw for 365 yards in that game. If he was a little bit more efficient in that game, it could have been like absolutely bonkers. So there's part of me that just sees a huge ceiling here. I tend to think Ayuk's ownership is going to come up based on the recent performance. But yeah, this is the team that to me is probably most challenging to figure out and most important to figure out for this slate.
Yeah, I mean, the GPP bro in me is like, 70% small field Christian McCaffrey, easy fade. However, man, I do not think that's the case. This guy's role is absolutely insane. And I would agree with Leone. I mean, I want to play Brock Purdy stuff every week. Love the Purdy stuff. You get a price gap here, Peter, between Ayuk and Debo of 1,100, which is kind of pushing ownership a bit that way. But to Leone's point, I do think we need to come up on the Ayuk ownership, and I certainly prefer Ayuk. I mean, we have it 2.7 points apart in base projection. I think that's about right now between Ayuk and Debo. Obviously, Debo can take a 2-yard pass and turn it into an 80-yard touchdown at any time. Peter, what do you think about Ayuk, Debo, and anything else 49ers?
Yeah, I was bummed to see the ownership projection we currently have on Debo, because Debo to me just seems like the nut GPP play before ownership, just based on kind of old school DFS. Most people would just look at the game logs. They'd see Ayuk's been going off. Debo hasn't done much, had the injury. And we've seen so many times throughout Debo's career. I mean, this is one of the best runners in the NFL, period. Like, he can do it on a catch. He can do it on a run. Debo can turn basically any play into a long touchdown. And I'm going to bet on talent. But at 27%, that's not what I'm looking to click as much relative to some of the other guys. So we'll see how ownership shakes out. But my first initial lean was I want to be early on Debo having some breakout games. He's one of the best players in the NFL. I think he's truly just an exceptional weapon on the 49ers offense. But yeah, if people are going to play a ton of him, then you're not gaining that much. And Ayuk, I mean, I think they said on Sunday that he has the highest yards per catch in the NFL. He's been extremely efficient, obviously coming off a huge game. Teams are selling out to stop the run and everything else that the 49ers do. So I expect them to continue to win and have big games. So yeah, it's kind of tricky given where we have projections and ownership right now. There's not like a standout play. When initially first looking at the slate, I was like, oh, this is a great spot to be early on Debo. But yeah, if everyone else is thinking the same thing, then that's not good.
I thought it was encouraging that George Kittle had a pretty good game, or a really good game, even with Debo in the lineup this past week. You know what you're getting with Kittle. He could airball. He can absolutely go nuts and break the slate. Leone, how would you think about playing Purdy stacks? My Purdy stacks are typically on main slates. My Purdy stacks have been with McCaffrey and one pass catcher, i.e. Purdy, McCaffrey, Debo, or Purdy, McCaffrey, Ayuk, or Purdy, McCaffrey, Kittle. I could see doing something different here on a 3-game slate. How would you be thinking about stacking Purdy?
Yeah, I think if I'm playing Debo, I'm not playing Ayuk and CMC, because Debo's somewhat leverage off both those guys in different ways, where like he can get the rushing touchdown away from CMC and he's going to take some pass work from Ayuk. I think you can certainly play him with one of those two guys, but I don't think I play those three. I know our odds of being in the optimal lineup have Kittle as a positive leverage, relative to his ownership on both sides by a decent bit. And Kittle's tough because when everybody's healthy, the floor is just not that great. But on a small slate, if you get one of those Kittle games, he could be one of those guys where you just like absolutely have to have him in your lineup. Like CMC could put up 30 and there's some weird routes where like you don't have to have him, maybe not 30, but like 25, and you don't have to have him. But if Kittle has one of his huge games with the way the tight end position looks, he may be the guy you absolutely have to have. And I don't really see his ownership getting meaningfully higher than we have it.
So other tight ends on this slate are Jake Ferguson, Sam Laporta, Logan Thomas. I mean, to me, that's like the only threats whatsoever to Kittle separating. Now, Kittle is 6K. Ferguson's only 3,900. Logan Thomas is 3,500. Laporta is 5,200 on DraftKings. But I guess my point is that it wouldn't be that, like, you wouldn't need even a Kittle nuclear game for him to separate. Mm-hmm. Kittle could get 16, and every other tight end could easily get like 7. And at that point, you probably need Kittle. You may not have to have him, but you probably need Kittle if he outscores the entire rest of the position by like 12. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the field might not double tight end as much as they should, especially on FanDuel, where they're probably not used to doing it as much, which is, I know people don't like to do that. It feels gross, but I think on this slate, it might call for it. I do think, and we were looking at Laporta's target share, and it's hard to tell if this is like noise or like splits, that actually matter. But when both the running backs have been active, his target share has been like a little bit more muted, and the play calling has been a little bit more towards the run heavy way. So like I prefer Kittle as the spend to Laporta at where the ownership is right now.
Last thing on the Niners, Peter, the defense we have as the second best defense on the slate, just from raw. Cowboys clearly the best against Sam Howell here. But yeah, you get 49ers, Lions as kind of the second tier of defenses. And then you get Seahawks, Commanders, Packers below that. I think on these short slates, defense can be very, very important. I think people from a portfolio perspective, if they're making a lot of lineups, like to just get a certain amount of exposure to virtually all the defenses on a slate like this. Because if one scores a touchdown, you don't have it, you're pretty much done, which is a horrible feeling. But yeah, I don't know, Peter, how are you thinking about defense for this slate for someone who doesn't play a full 150 set?
I mean, Cowboys are the obvious one, just given how much Sam Howell's going to drop back, all the attempts, the sacks he's taken. Obviously, it's gotten a little bit better recently, but Dallas is hands down the best play just from an equity perspective. But the 49ers is probably my favorite GPP defense, and there's one path that we'll talk about the Seahawks in a second, but I'm not totally sure what's going on with Geno. It didn't look good. I know he came back in, but like if he's not 100% and we see Drew Lock, I mean, that's a good recipe for a defense. When Drew Lock's out there, he's got a lot of swag and confidence, and he'll throw some interceptions in a hurry. What did he play, like 1 or 2 series, and he threw an interception? So,
yeah,
I mean, I'm all for hoping that path, comes to fruition. All if there's any uncertainty around Geno's health, like that he's going to play the whole game, or even in the scenario where somehow he's not starting, like that's going to really help the 49ers defense. So my concern overall in the 49ers is that Seattle won't be able to push it and keep this game close. But the line's close to 7, so maybe that's wrong thinking given it's a divisional game. But I'm nervous for Seattle with Geno Smith being banged up.
All right. That's a good transition to the Seattle side of things. So to be clear on Geno's injury, this is a contusion, a.k.a. a bruise. They looked at his tricep. They looked at his elbow. There's nothing structural. He was able to come back into the game. I fully expect Geno to start in this game. However, they said there's swelling, there's soreness. Again, a contusion at his tricep / elbow. I think depending on how the reporting goes with this, if Schefter comes out and says that Geno's 100%, he's going to be fine, I could see Geno being owned a little bit more than we have it. If there's nothing or he's truly questionable for this game and they list him questionable, I could see him coming in at like no ownership. So this is the last game. An emergency swap, I guess, could be Geno. Again, I think if there's bad vibes around him, he could come in really low owned. Certainly don't like the spot for him. Leone, how do you think about Geno as we sit here Tuesday evening?
Yeah, I'm just like worried the ceiling's not there on Geno. I do think, Seattle's going to pass more than usual, just given the matchup being an underdog and with Kenneth Walker out, and, Charbonnet being more of a pass catcher. I think the pass rate's going to be good, but, I think the ceiling's more like he throws a lot, like decent completion rate, but doesn't get down the field a ton and has like a 250 and 2 game, which, on a small slate could get you there, but there's some other bets that I'd rather make. It's also tough ownership wise. Like, everyone's going to be owned on a small slate, but I think JSN, people are going to chase that. It was nice to see his ADOT up a little bit more. He had some good air yards last week. But I'm most interested in Charbonnet at running back, even if he's somewhat chalky. I just think like there's a chance he plays almost every down in this spot.
Yeah. So to be clear, Kenneth Walker has this oblique thing, almost certainly going to be out of this game if he hasn't been ruled out already. Charbonnet in a different matchup at this price would be like 80% owned. I feel like if they were playing the Commanders and Charbonnet was 5,300, he would be outrageously owned. Because it's the 49ers, people are going to shy away at least a little bit here. I don't want to miss a chance to be in on Charbonnet. This was one of my most drafted players in best ball. Think that he can, as you saw last week, ran awesome, broke a ton of tackles, and caught 6 balls. So I like Charbonnet. The matchup is obviously difficult. Peter, any Seattle overall thoughts here?
Yeah, I love Charbonnet. Played him, I feel like, over half the slates last year in college football, too, at UCLA. Just a total stud. Electric in the passing game. I really like him as a runner. It's obviously a tough matchup, but I would expect kind of my initial read, given what we know about the injury, is that Geno will be maybe slightly limited, just given that it's his throwing arm, and maybe he's not going to have the same explosiveness throwing the ball down the field. So what kind of game plan is that going to lead to? A lot of short passes, more screens, things of that nature. And I think that sets up so well for Charbonnet. Like, he's one of their best players in space. The other concern I have about Seattle is, Lockett was definitely, we knew he was going to play. Adam, you said you were like 95% sure that he was going to play, but again, short week. So his Lockett's not quite 100%. Geno's not 100%. I worry a little bit for this team.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the good news for Seattle is that they're at home here, and maybe they can get things turned around a little quicker. I was just looking at the line movement. Let's see here. Yeah, this has actually come off 7 to 6.5 in most places, which is actually a big move. So maybe there's some optimism. I haven't seen the reports yet out of the day, but I want to hear more. This is probably the most important spot of the week, is just understanding Seattle health situation, and specifically around Geno and how to play it. But yeah, Charbonnet is a no-brainer play.
Yeah, so I think Lockett's going to play, but I agree with you. He seems quite banged up right now, would lead me to liking JSN a decent amount here. However, the problem, Leone, like you said, is that playing Geno doubles or even just playing these guys as one-offs is going to be going into a bunch of ownership. Like, I think JSN one-off, DK Metcalf one-off are interesting plays, even if you don't want to use Geno. But God, I don't know if that's good at 20+%. So yeah, any thoughts on the Metcalf, Lockett, JSN stuff?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think we're probably most negative around the industry on Lockett, like projecting him to be limited. So I'm off of him and would be more onto either JSN or Metcalf. It's difficult because, like, I think 20% is not great, but at the same time, it's a 3-game slate. Like, guys are going to be owned. You might just have to run into like the absolute perfect combination. And I think, JSN is the one I'm struggling with the most because it's a young kind of ascending player. We really liked him as a prospect. The air yards were a little bit better last week. Like, you could definitely tell yourself a story with JSN to try and get there. But I think ultimately I'm going to be pretty bearish on the passing game for Seattle here. And yeah, the tight end distribution's been so annoying. So it's not like you can really make a stab there, even in GPP.
All right. Anything else to say on this game, or are we ready to move to the flag plant portion of the program?
I think I'm ready for flag plants. I don't really see too much here that's like not crazy gal brained, and it's tougher to crazy galaxy brain this slate than past Thanksgiving slates. Peter's hit on this a couple times, but like, we actually have 3 really strong offenses and high expected scoring teams. So it's not like, Jawan Jennings scores a random touchdown. He's still probably like a dog to be in the optimal lineup. So it's a little bit tougher from that aspect.
Right. All right. Mike says, are these drink cups filled with apple and grape juice? Way too coherent here. You're not wrong, buddy. We messed up.
Cheers. I was going to be like, cheers.
I was going to say, how was Peter not mentioning college football on the drinking card game?
I mentioned college football. Yeah, that would have done it for sure.
It wasn't.
We said Sims a million times.
God. Yeah,
and we definitely didn't live up to our drinking obligations on the Sims commentary.
Yeah, there's 5 cups there.
Oh, Levitan's
I'm on East
dying
Coast
over
time.
there.
It's evening for me. You guys are like in the afternoon. So
oh yeah, it's 4 o'clock here. Oh, I got a big
dad score records.
Nanny's about to leave. Got the kids on duty here in a second. This is trouble.
All right. Reminder, we will be back, myself, Silva, and Wiggins, tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. to go through #team play the best plays. We won't be worrying about ownership on that show. We'll strictly be talking about what we think the best plays are for that slate. We will wrap up here with just a fun flag plan. For those guys who are not subscribers, it's something that Dink and Leone do each Saturday morning on Establish the Million. They give a flag plan. The idea is to try to find someone somewhat low owned to take a stand on here for tournaments. Obviously, it is harder to find someone low owned on a 3-game slate. So we will be liberal with the ownership projections here. Leone, I'll give you the floor. We'll do one.
I mean, I can't go first.
It's only
you guys are the honored guests.
One flag plan.
The real honored guests.
one flag plan for a 3-game slate. Normally they do 2 flag plants. And by the way, for subscribers, Establish the Million and Establish the Show, normal schedule, main slate for Sunday, all normal schedule, all for subscribers, totally normal schedule there. So yeah, Leone, I implore you to go first here.
All right. I'm afraid this player is going to get like wish casted by everybody and like end up like 20% owned. But if he is more like 10% owned, I think Jameson Williams is a really fun play to start off the slate. Gives you some late swap, knowledge right off the bat as far as what you should do with the rest of your lineup. We mentioned the route share being up. really big play guy. We haven't necessarily seen a ton of huge plays from this year, but we seen him find the end zone. So I'll go with Jameson Williams to kick off the slate.
JMO for Mr. Leone. Yes, long time coming for Jameson Williams. I mean, if you want to get excited about Jameson Williams, I know this is Peter's bit, but man, he was unreal at Alabama. I mean, I'm not
go watch YouTube highlights. Let's
YouTube
go.
Highlights. Just go to the old YouTube.
Cheers.
Go to the YouTube.
JMO YouTube.
Put in Jameson Williams, Alabama, and you will get to close to a full 3.9 inches. I mean, this dude was on fire at Alabama. All right. Okay, Peter, go ahead.
I almost brought like my volcano in here and just smoked weed instead of the entire time instead of drinking, which may have been better or maybe worse. Might have been worse in a lot of ways. But real quick, be a little sappy here, but truly thankful for you guys, thankful for the ETR community. I know you hate this holiday, Levitan, but love you guys. Cheers.
Yes.
Thankful. Truly.
Yes. Thankful for everybody watching
really
too. I mean,
it.
Thankful
And
for
to
you
Dink.
guys. This and to Dink too. But seriously, like without the people watching, I mean, I know I joke all the time. We're sitting here drinking at 4 p.m. in the afternoon talking about football. I mean, got to be grateful for it. So although I hate Thanksgiving, I am thankful for sure. Anyways, go ahead, Peter, with your flag.
I'm also thankful for all the college football games and hopefully thankful for the money that I potentially can make. But yeah, I need to win some NFL DFS. Not my best season so far, so hopefully get it going here. I love the JMO call. I was going to for sure flag plant Jaden Reed. I'll do another one just because I'm a little worried. They're saying he's on the injury report. We're not really worried yet, but just in case. The other person I'd say is Brandon Cooks, who this Dallas offense, we want a ton of pieces around it. I think it makes sense to do the onslaughts. I like the Brandon Cooks with Dak with like Lamb and Ferguson or Lamb and Pollard or whatever you want to do as a one-off. But I also think he could play, with like a Purdy stack or whatever. So Cooks could really break the slate, has a lot of upside. His role's been a lot better recently, and he's indoors where historically over his career, he's just been electric. So Brandon Cooks is my flag plant.
Yes, Brandon Cooks, who was a big part of breaking the slate 2 weeks ago for that Dak stack that Leone had. Okay. There's a lot of good running backs on this slate. Christian McCaffrey is grossly underpriced, in my opinion. Jahmyr Gibbs is, everybody's excited about Jahmyr Gibbs, and rightfully so. Tony Pollard against the Commanders. Zach Charbonnet finally gets a full-time role. Brian Robinson, everyone is excited about, and I think rightfully so. My most owned player in best ball is going to get overlooked on this slate, and that would be Mr. David Montgomery. I think when they get around the goal line, I know Jahmyr Gibbs has scored a bunch of goal line rushes lately. I think when they get around the goal line, their preference is to have David Montgomery in there. Also, for that last 2-minute drill in the game last week, it was David Montgomery who was in, who buried us in props by somehow catching 2 catches on the final drive. So he's not ruled out of goal line work. In fact, I think he's a favorite for it. He's not ruled out of pass down work. In fact, I think he'll have a decent amount of it. And he's just really good, and they're going to try to get 30, 35, 40 total running back touches in this game. We have David Montgomery for 10% ownership in small field right now. I hope me flag planting David Montgomery does not affect that because I really like him for small field. David Montgomery will be my flag plant.
Yeah, the thing with David Montgomery too, if what Peter thinks might happen happens, where people want to overplay this early game, I mean, David Montgomery is the kind of like, skeleton key to this game fouling for a lot of other players. Gibbs fouls, the Goff stacks foul. You play the Green Bay passing, maybe you correlate Montgomery with the Detroit defense.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely see ways where like everybody else fouls in this game, and you start with a clean Montgomery Detroit defense, and then like maybe you can even get like pretty chalky outside of that. So I definitely like that call. I know I was on the Jameson thing, but if I'm probably making like lineups with Montgomery and then some other ones that are a little bit more aggressive on the passing side of things for both teams.
Yeah, and if Montgomery hits as a contrarian piece, like Leone's saying, you could just go to Dak's stack.
Dallas.
Yeah, just go to all the Dallas stuff. So yeah.
To be clear too, just real quick, because I know you just mentioned it again, Leone. Normally that's the case. I've played all these things, even sites. Normally the first game of the games are like even, or the first game's like the best game, people just go so ham on it. This year's a little weird just because I think the Dallas stuff is going to soak up so much ownership. So I'm not confident it's going to be overowned even relative to our projections, but I do think there's a bias towards like, hey, Thanksgiving, people are drinking.
Yeah,
it's like
for
the first
sure.
game. I got to go with the family. And the one thing too, like we talked about it again, the most important thing about the slate is just understanding late swap and where you are. And I promise you, high stakes everywhere, people are going to fuck it up. Like it's just a day where people get drunk and are with family and whatever else, and they forget to look at their lineup. So that's an advantage for people grinding out there.
The ownership's definitely a little bit harder to pin down than on a normal Thanksgiving slate where like we had that one slate with like Watson and Fuller and Cooks, and it was like so obvious that Houston would be like crazy owned early. And this slate, like you said, you get Dallas, Washington. Are people going to play into that? But then they don't play San Francisco as much. And like it's really important to keep an eye on things because there's one team in each game that has a really high ceiling. Also, like, what is my accent? George says my accent is wild. I don't even know what this accent is.
George is from Rhode Island, so he's up in your somewhat neck of the woods there, but
Northeast.
Yeah. All right.
The 2-game slate too is also great. Get in there for the 2-game slate. Gotta tout that, especially with the games we have. You know, get in there. People are partying. That's another little bit of alpha out there.
All right. Appreciate you all being here. One more time, 2 things that you need to know for Black Friday sales. Establish therun.com/Black Friday for anyone who has not tried ETR, wants to get a look at the in-season package, some outrageous deals there. Second, at the Solver. Again, please go to my Twitter at Adam Levitan, use the link there and use your same ETR email so that everything syncs, but 50% off on the Solver, all the NFL products over there. Be sure you're following me at Adam Levitan, Leone at 2hats1mike, Peter at CSU Ram 88. Subscribe button on YouTube is indeed free. Feel free to hit it. This was fun. Appreciate you guys all being here. Sorry we didn't get too hammered, but I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old who need my attention right now, as well as a million other things. So getting hammered was not particularly in the cards, but this was still fun. For Leone. For Mr. Jennings, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.